Assalamu alaikum. Danish, welcome. Thank you for joining us today.
Walaikum salam, thank you.
So, I know that you would prefer to be introduced rather than introduce yourself. So, I'm just going to read out your bio for to those who are unfamiliar with In Sheikh's Clothing. Danish Qasim is the founder of In Sheikh's Clothing. He has been working with victims of spiritual abuse since 2009. Danish has studied Islamic studies both academically as well as traditionally in the USA and internationally. He is also well experienced in community work, Muslim leadership training, and Muslim youth development. So, today we are talking about a very important topic, which would be on the topic of temporary marriages, or you could call them some secret marriages. In general, they are just exploitative marriages. Why I've decided to discuss this topic here on our platform is because we hope to create awareness amongst women, whether they are single, divorced, about being cautious in embarking upon such a relationship. And, we're going to be unpacking the nuances of that. But it's important to be aware. And someone like Danish has seen case after case of these certain scenarios. So, welcome, Danish. Thank you. So, my first question is, what are the kinds of temporary marriages out there? Is there just one type or are there more?
So there's the well-known mut'a, right, which is not accepted by any Sunni. And interestingly enough, some Sunnis will appeal to it, saying it was allowed in the early period. So they'll kind of appeal to that, but that's completely rejected. That's mainly what people think of. So it's very easy for them to say, well, that's just a mut'a, you can't do that. But no, what actually many people will end up doing is finding a loophole, right? Which is nikah biniyat talaq. Like they'll enact the contract, they'll marry the person, but keep the intention of divorce hidden. They just won't verbalize it, and that's what makes the contract valid.
And is it really valid?
The contract is yes. The contract of the nikah is.
Okay, so then I think the next important question to ask is let us discuss what is legally binding, like it's shari'i, right? So it's valid according to the Sharia, but it goes against the spirit of Islam. And I think that this is very important because I've heard people say outrageous things on social media and saying, "Oh, but the Sharia says this." And I think it's important to define what is actually like the basic parameter, but not what might necessarily be the ideal. If you could just talk more about that.
So this is why I think it's important to put this out, right? That this is what people will do when they want to do temporary marriages is on this technicality, they will go and effectively just really harm people, right? With this temporary marriage, and then appeal to the fact that the marriage contract is valid and what they did in terms of just the contract is allowed. So, what needs to be understood here is that yes, these marriages do exist. They are mentioned even as sometimes, in some cases, being mustahab, but that is when there's no deception there. So, there's a big difference between both parties kind of understanding it without it being explicitly mentioned, which again is a whole nother topic, right? And one party being under the impression, like her being under the impression that this is a real marriage, it's mu'abbad, it's forever, and then being misled to think that, and then being divorced because he intended it to be secret. And that's where it's haram because he's deceiving her. So it's the deception that makes it haram, which is external to the contract itself. So I think it's very important that the validity of the contract not be used as a justification for the deception and the harm it causes the other person.
Right. So then essentially technically, right, on paper, it's valid, but it goes against the entire ethics behind marriage and having a good intention and being there to support the woman and to create family, children, relations, extended family. And so then it brings to question, well, then what is this person's motive? Like there's obviously some exploitative motive if the person is getting into this with the intention that it is impermissible.
So contracts are either valid or invalid, right? And it stops there. So that's why it's not much of a defense for other forms of exploitation or abuse or manipulation that come from a valid contract. And we need to stop giving this as an excuse. So what in some cultures, and I know this is shocking, but this needs to be mentioned so people really understand, because particularly in some Sufi groups, what will happen is they'll appeal to some of their awliya, the big scholars, right? Saying, oh, but this person had 100 wives. This person had this many number of wives. Now, that happens from nikah biniyat talaq. They're marrying with the intention of divorce. And as I mentioned, it goes back to not explicitly mentioning it, but in these scenarios, both sides will kind of know. It's like it's indicated but not explicated,
I'm sorry.
which is different.
Are you saying that in the two parties are entering the marriage, both of them knowing that the marriage will end?
Yeah.
Why
Mhm.
would anybody go into a marriage? Why would both people go into a marriage knowing it would end? If you could just explain more.
Some people just want short marriages. Some people in some of these groups, it's, so she can have a child from Ahlul Bayt. In Sunni groups, this is done. So she just wants, even her father, by the way, and this means a marriage done with the wali's consent. Okay. He will give his daughter to the sheikh for a night or for a short period, all indicated, so she can be pregnant with his son and then have a son from Ahlul Bayt. So this is a real thing.
This actually
Okay.
happens in this day and age.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
It's unbelievable. I don't even know what to say.
Mhm. So, but here, as I'm saying, as strange as it may be, right? The element of deception is not there. What we're talking about is when one side doesn't know, when the woman doesn't know, and that's the deception. So it's, I think you said the spirit of marriage. So look, yeah, the Quran mentions clear maqasid of marriage, right? Mawadda, rahma, children, but
I'm gonna stop you to
not
translate.
every.
So you're saying that the
uh,
Quran mentions the objectives of marriage, which would be mawadda, love, rahma, mercy, yes, progeny, right?
children. But not everybody wants all of this, and you can't really fault somebody for not wanting what's ideal. So what we should focus on is the deception element. Because look, there are different cultures, different expectations. People grow up wanting different things. People are into different stuff, right? And we're not relativists with the law, but we are with culture, you know? Like we accept different cultures and we can be judgmental culturally. Like what I said and other things that people do in marriage, you could find ridiculous, you can look down on it, but you just can't call the halal haram or the haram halal. That's kind of it. So we need to understand that we are not the world. And what we want in a marriage, what people we know want in a marriage is not universal. But we have to look at what's deceptive, what's exploitative. And other than that, look, if people want to give up rights, like some do in their marriage, that's up to them.
Okay, so do scholars differ in terms of the permissibility and ethics behind these marriages?
So I've had a lot of conversations about this. So, for example, what I mentioned about these kind of implicit temporary marriages, where that's the intention. Some of them have been very surprised when they encountered it. Actually, everybody I know who's not from those particular regions where it's really popular. And look, people who went and did talab al-ilm in the early to mid 2000s know which places do this. They know it very well. Okay, and this is something they'll be often surprised by how common this is amongst some of the people that they revere as high awliya, right? Or regarded as great saints. How common temporary marriages are. Um, so scholars I know who've gone to one of these or one place of this and taught from other countries have been shocked by it, kind of laugh at it, find it really weird. And I've had many conversations with such scholars. But at the end of the day, they'll say, you know, it's strange, but it's not haram. And they all have stories of things they've seen. But this needs to be understood because these kind of stories, when you're in the in group, are used to justify what's intentionally deceptive and takes away from the rights of women, and then they won't be given rights. And there's a false comparison made between these kind of marriages, which again you don't have to like, right? Big scholars don't like them, but they're not comparable to the ones with deception in them.
Okay, so in terms of the way we're defining these, so these marriages could be temporary, as in there's an intention for deceit, but they could be public. But then you can also have these marriages with the intention of ending the marriage, i.e., there's deceit involved, but it's
Mhm.
secret and it's been asked, we or told or instructed that this needs to be kept secret. Okay. Do you want to go into that or yeah,
I was just talking about it's done with a wali. Like the woman's
right?
wali knows that she's going to have like a very short marriage.
Right.
It's
So
accepted,
so
which
then
doesn't mean it's good. Look, I said terms like wali, like these people are believed to be awliya. Wali here not meaning guardian, but like a saint, right?
mm,
Um, that's kind of the question. Do you have to believe people who are doing this are awliya, right? No, of course not. So somebody who's doing something, following their shahwa in a halal way, though,
by the way, shahwa
but just
means
marrying,
desire.
yeah, desire, and having this high number of marriage and doing something like this, are you really supposed to believe they're not just average Muslims or they're not just Muslims doing the halal, but they're the saints? You know, that becomes a tough sell, and there's no reason to believe that. But that is what they believe, and that's also why these same groups will have other people under them. A lot of times, for example, Western students now going out carrying uh, marriages with the deception where only he knows it's temporary and she thinks it's a real marriage.
Okay. So now, so I would argue that the secret marriage is even worse because the secret marriage, there's also the element of deception. There's the intention of ending this marriage. But on top of that, the woman is stripped of so much, like her connections, protection, maybe, nafaqah, marital maintenance, etc. It goes on and on and on. Or even, God forbid, if she had children within that situation. So it just seems to be like a much more severe scenario. It might be common sense, but perhaps you have something to add to that in terms of
Are
why are
you
these
combining this kind of marriage with secrecy? Well, I would agree because now there's two elements, right? But secret also has to be defined. So there's layers of or different levels of secrecy. So one level of secrecy is a couple giving the impression that they're not married or just not publicizing the marriage or hiding it from the wali, like a marriage done without telling the wali. And we need to understand that a secret marriage is not really something. The term secret marriage is out of the four Sunni madhahib, it's really, as far as I know, only in the Maliki school. And this is based on me talking to scholars of each madhab. And in the Maliki madhab, what a secret marriage is, which it's haram in the Maliki school, it's the only madhab that says a secret marriage is wrong. And there, it's very severe, actually. It's a very severe prohibition. So a secret marriage, according to the Maliki school, is when the groom tells witnesses not to tell anybody, but he has to tell witnesses not to tell anybody. And it can mean, sorry, it's not just don't tell anybody. It could even be just don't tell my wife, my first wife. Or it could mean just don't tell that one group of people. All of that is considered a secret nikah, and it's very severe in the Maliki school. But the Maliki school is the only madhab that has it.
okay, so for the other schools, you could keep it just between the people who are there present at the nikah.
Exactly, which could be just two witnesses.
Okay. I think that we need to really unpack why does this leave a person vulnerable? I do want to say that I recently heard a testimony from a woman who was manipulated into a secret marriage by somebody who is like a popular social media figure who apparently is a dai. And it was shocking for me to hear. It was really, really shocking. And it really highlighted in depth how this woman really thought that she was in a permanent marriage. And she stated how her family was kept out of it. There were always excuses made. She couldn't, her husband wouldn't meet her family, talk to them. He didn't provide nafaqah, didn't provide a residence. And he had every intention of this being a temporary thing. So is anything else you want to add in terms of what makes women vulnerable? Like what is the kind of extent of the damage that can be done?
Well, look, the difficulty is there's levels, right? So if we're going to warn people from these marriages, there's a lot to say. The other side, and I've written on this, is if there is something publicized, it's very difficult to know what actually happened in any particular case. So the best thing to do is just avoid these kind of marriages. But judging between what actually happened in any situation, you have to hear both sides because, like I said, there are reasons where people actually agree to these type of marriages. And I think the danger of what's called like a misyar marriage is when it's now called a misyar marriage, but it's just when a woman foregoes some of her rights, is she could demand those rights back at any time. So it's not like set in stone that, well, she gave up the rights, so now she doesn't have them. She could demand them back. But the flip side of that is he can divorce her at any time, right? So if people want these kind of marriages, it's not a good situation to be in. And then how do you judge it if you're actually going to look into any particular cases? Like, was it something that just people thought would work out in a certain way and then it didn't, so it's really hard to judge particular cases. But what's important is, you said, what makes people vulnerable. It could be a different set of things, but what I'm trying to get at here is it may not be from vulnerability at all. Like there was an article I read over 10 years ago, I believe, about women in the UK who have their jobs, they have their careers, they don't want to be full-time wives. So these women are giving up their rights intentionally because they don't want to be full-time wives, and they say they don't need full-time husbands. So that's not really a vulnerability, it's just what they want, right? Like some women want a khula without really, they just don't want to be wives anymore, right? And some women just don't want to be full-time wives. And in other cases, it's enough for a woman, even the idea of secrecy. So it won't fit maybe a definition of secrecy in terms of what I mentioned about the Maliki school, or, not telling her wali, right? The wali can know, it could be a small group of people who know, but she wants it to be kept very private. Now, we might look at that and just say, oh, but she's not going to have her full dignity as a wife. Okay, in maybe a normative situation, we would see it as that. But what are the particulars of that situation? Maybe she was recently divorced and will be judged for getting remarried, or she just doesn't want that to deal with that right now, right? Or she was widowed and is getting remarried. She doesn't want to deal with other things going on. Maybe there's custody disputes. This happens as well, that like they're going through a divorce right now, and it can hurt her legal divorce, like in the court process, if she gets a nikah. So she just wants to do it and keep it secret. So all of these things happen, and you can call those vulnerabilities, you can call those just circumstances or choices or preferences. So it really depends on the situation. But for the exploitative marriages, right? And this is really the main issue, is when these things are done in manipulative, calculated ways and exploitative ways. There's a lot of, it depends on the person that's targeted. So for example, an older single woman, and older can even mean 35, right? Based on the way the person will guilt her, is like, look, you're already 35, you're single, you're not going to have a normal marriage, just give up already. Like you have to settle for this, something like this is what you can get right now. And unfortunately, I know, sheikhs who've done this kind of stuff, and or even saying that you're a working woman, there's a lot of fitna out there, you need a halal outlet for your desires, and just be realistic. So trying to convince these women that realistic means giving up some of your rights, that's really, really bad. But that happens. Or if they have children, like divorced women with children, for example, or they weren't Muslim but they have children, single woman with children, right? So when they're pressured to give up rights, or if they're guided away from their wali, like guided away from family or their wali, which is, really there to help them make the best decision, people who look out for their best interest, kind of cornering them and saying, compromise, give up your rights, don't talk to other people, let's keep this a secret. Those are highly exploitative situations.
Yeah, I see people who are also very lonely, and then suddenly they receive
Yeah,
this attention, and then even though it's not their ideal, but they would rather have crumbs than nothing at all. Sometimes they don't even have to
absolutely.
be manipulated into it. It's just that they themselves just are so, in a way, needy, desperate, isolated.
Yeah.
And then also, some people, they are very much tied down, single parenting, and it can become very tedious. And then there's this excitement, and then that can also stem from probably the media exposure since growing up, whether it's Hollywood or Bollywood, about this like erotic, exciting outlet, not really thinking about, what could the consequences of this be? I mean, as you said, it's an array of possibilities, right?
But even when you say consequences, you're thinking like a particular person, right? Some may just think of, maybe they had boyfriend, girlfriend relationships before, and now this is just like a halal way of having that. So people even want different things out of these kind of relationships. No, it's true. Um, we
And
have the whole spectrum of people.
Ryan, yes, and also, because especially I find that in America there is a culture where people really put the certain scholars on a pedestal, and they really are seen through rose-colored glasses. And so, I mean, I know somebody who was sitting next to another woman who had seen a certain prominent sheikh on stage, and said, I would totally be his second wife, not knowing that his actual wife was right there. So women are very ready to throw themselves at these people because they almost see them as being as almost like angelic human beings on this earth, as if they could not do any wrong, as if they could not exploit, manipulate. So if such a man would approach them, it would be such a major compliment.
Yeah, maybe they don't even think they're like angelic. Maybe it's just being enamored by someone in a leadership position. It's charisma. I mean, this happens with all forms of social capital, right? Someone could be a billionaire, they know he's not moral, but they want to be in the same situation, right? So the point is we recognize that sometimes women want these kind of marriages. It's not necessarily from an insecurity. It's not necessarily from a vulnerability, but they will accept it. So for all marriages, then you do look at what happens when the contract's enacted, right? So that's one, but also what was the process of the marriage. So as I'm mentioning, like for example, there's a real case of like a man, he was very old, like, and I'm not exaggerating when I say like in his 90s, right? He said that I saw a dream with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam where he said to marry her, and the father gave his daughter to marry in marriage to him. And soon after, he said, I saw a dream where then I was told to divorce her, and he divorced her. Right. So these are like the real manipulative elements that, like, when I talk about exploitative marriages and manipulative marriages, it's these kind of things, like saying you need me to progress in your suluk, and your path to God is through me, these kind of things, which happens quite a bit. Or encouraging women to journal, for example. There's a phenomenon that really should be talked about more, that I'm trying to bring attention to, which is when a sheikh will be asked to mediate between a couple, to counsel them, right? And in that counseling, he's picking up on what her thought process is, what she likes, what she doesn't like. And he's able to turn her away from her husband and guide her towards him. I mean, he's learning her ideals. So now he can be her ideal. So he's breaking up a marriage. This is the type of person that the shaitan puts a crown on, right? The shaitan that helps split between two people, but this is what he's acting as. And then he turns her away from her husband. This is called takhbib, when you do that. And this happens quite a bit. So getting into that position where you're learning what her psychological makeup, because this is what predators do. They want to learn the psychological makeup of a person, right? And just turn her away from her husband, guide her towards him.
So, Danish, regarding polygyny, just to be clear, you are not against polygyny at all, but you are against manipulative type of polygyny, right? If you would like to expand upon that.
Yeah, I always told people I'm anti polygamy. Um, I'm not pro, not against it either, and I don't think anyone should be against it, for obvious reasons. For example, look, I think there's a real when Muslims say that it's inappropriate for our time or it's inappropriate in our context, they're excluding subcultures where this is normal, you know. And not everyone has the same cultural expectations of marriage. So I think all marriage, and this is what my teachers told me as well, right? When they told me how to talk about marriage, they said always look at it as an individual ruling. That it could be for one person haram to get married, it could be wajib for another person to get married. Some people can make it work, some people can make it not work, right? So polygamy, as long as it's not exploitative, again, it's not with the intention of divorce, especially when giving the impression that it's not. Um, what's wrong with it? What would be the argument against it? Obviously, it needs to be done with caution. Like what shouldn't happen is that it's glorified in a way where people who aren't able to uphold polygamy are kind of pushed to it, because Ardal Bain Zojain is a very serious thing. To do justice between two wives and give everybody their rights, it's a lot. There's a lot to it, and that's why a lot of times when people want a second wife, they actually want a second class wife, and that's when they want her to give up a lot of her rights, because then it's just like, it's not a real wife, because then they don't have rights to fulfill to this other lady, right? And that's why and when we're talking about multiple wives done right, it's you don't really see it as first wife, oh, he got a second, or first wife, second wife. You just see these are his wives. Well, exploitation in with a second wife doesn't differ too much from a first wife. The differences a lot of times are that this might surprise you as well, is the first wife will help sometimes gain a second wife. So she'll help her husband find somebody that is that she will have power over as well, who won't threaten her position and can be easily discarded afterwards. And some of the tactics will be that they spend time together. So a man and his wife kind of bring this new woman into the picture, and they'll spend time together to give the impression that, look, we can all be a happy family. Look, people try to make it so complicated. Look, we're making it work. Then you can tell her, the world, people don't understand this, but you understand it. It works out well. And then his first wife will be an asset for him later on to say that, look, we tried to make it work. It wasn't secret. I knew about it. She was crazy.
Why would she do such a thing? What does a first wife have to gain from such a situation?
I get asked that a lot. Talk to people about this, but again, I can't fully psychoanalyze. I don't know. I mean, maybe it's just having control over this situation. Maybe it's just, it's just how she thinks. And sometimes look, when people have been overseas together as well, for example, it becomes normal for them as well. Like let's say a couple was overseas together in the Muslim world, they come back, it's not a big deal. Or they just have different ideas of marriage. I mean, you have people converting as well who were in all kinds of strange arrangements. Not everybody thinks the same. This is like really important to understand.
So, what about hiding the marriage from the other wife?
So if someone hides a second wife from his first wife.
Yes, which is quite common.
Yeah. Now, the first thing here is doing justice between the wives becomes very difficult if you have two and you're hiding one from the other, right? So it's not advisable, of course, but these cases are very difficult to judge. This is why I'm saying anything that kind of gets public at this level of like, oh, he didn't tell his first wife, it's hard to know really what happened without knowing the full circumstances, because he could have a terrible marriage where she's causing the problems, right? Not fulfilling his rights. There could be reasons why he doesn't want to go through divorce process, maybe for the children, or other reasons. So he has a second wife, you know. Again, like it's very difficult to make this work long term. It's not advisable purely from the idea of eventually she's going to find out, right? Some people will do it to not hurt the feelings of their first wife, which again might hurt her feelings more in the long run. But we can't judge it as inherently like unethical or wrong to do so, because there could be reasons.
Yeah,
If there's no
it's a
reason,
case
it's
by case scenario.
case
Like
by case scenario.
I take issue with certain people on social media who will again speak about how, oh, he doesn't have to tell the wife anything. He can have, up to four wives, and he can lie. Like even if he is pinpointed and said, "Do you have a second wife?" He can straight up lie about it, and they say these things that are really outrageous, and this is very unbecoming of our sunnah, entirely unbecoming. And I think that is just really, in a way, it's just mean to the other wife. However, I think it is a case by case situation. There's a situation I'm familiar with where, for example, the husband is entirely barred from any physical intimacy whatsoever. She does not want him to take a second wife, but of course he is dedicated to the institution of their marriage and also the children. So that, in a way, is a very difficult situation for a man because he's deprived of his rights. So, anything you want to add to that? Just
No,
because,
I'm
yeah,
glad you mentioned that because people need to know this happens.
yeah.
And then this ends up being a reason for people to do that, to do secret marriage. And this type of secret, right? And if we want to get rid of all this, one great step would be to stop making these blanket statements of polygamy is inappropriate for our time. It's okay, it's allowed, or it's some historical phenomenon, but not in our time. When you do that, you encourage some elements of secrecy.
Right. And it's very challenging because everybody's situation is so particular, and then our societies can be very judgmental. And
Mhm.
we lack mercy and understanding. I mean, and it's understandable because that's the nature of culture, right? Culture is very
Mhm.
overpowering,
Yeah.
despite what the Sunnah says. A person is like really demonized, if they are part of a polygynous marriage. Danish,
Mhm.
now a woman, she gets married secretly, and she keep that away from her wali? Can she get married without the wali?
So this is only allowed, as far as I know, only allowed in the Hanafi school.
And are you sure that this is valid even if she is a virgin, like she
Yeah,
is not
right,
been divorced?
right, right. Yes.
Okay. So, any what are the implications of that?
So a woman getting married without her wali's permission is only allowed, as far as I know, only allowed in the Hanafi school, whether virgin or not, whether she's been married before or not. And this is because it's like another contract that she can enact. Like she could sell a car on her own. She could also marry herself. It's just enacting a contract, and she could do that on her own. So the contract is valid. Obviously, this is not an encouraged thing, and something that we really need to kind of teach in families is the importance of lineage. Or I would say this is one of the wisdoms of emphasizing lineage in people, because there should be that understanding of I'm not just myself as an individual, I'm representing my family, you know. So going against your wali in this kind of marriage is a very, very bad thing to do. But the marriage is valid. And and again, that's why I mentioned as an exploitative thing, manipulative angle in pursuing a type of marriage would be guiding her away from her wali, saying don't tell your wali, you know, and pushing her away from that. That's one way to recognize that a marriage is manipulative. However, like you said, right, and I completely agree that certain cases or a lot of cases have to be judged individually or case by case scenario. So there are parents who don't really care if their kids are getting married or not, and will literally say to their daughter that you can do whatever you want, get married or commit zina, but I'm not going to be your wali if you get married, and I'm not going to stop you if you want to do anything else. And sometimes just say, just don't get pregnant.
Wait, I'm
So they don't
sorry.
want like
Sorry. Who
any.
says this? This
As
is
in,
said?
as in the father will say that to his daughter
Why?
sometimes.
Why
Yeah,
would he say such a thing?
because they're not religious. They're not religious at all. It's just like don't get pregnant, get a good degree, get a good job, do whatever you want, and I don't really care for these things.
But are
So
you
they're
are
just
you
like not
privy? Are you
involved.
privy to these situations?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, look, there's other cases outside of any spiritual abuse, right? It's where fathers don't want their daughters to wear hijab. They prohibit them from wearing hijab. I'm sure you've come across this, where the daughters are hiding the fact that they're wearing hijab. Parents don't want, or the fathers, in what I'm familiar with, don't want their daughters or sons to pray Fajr because turning the faucet on wakes them up, right? So then you get questions like, can I make tayammum for Fajr if my dad's going to get upset? for me making wudu. So, like I said, we have everything like in society, right? Including this.
Well, I'm curious to know that if it comes out that such and such scholar has had a secret marriage with a woman, what do their seniors say? Like they senior shuyukh, what do they say about the situation?
So again, assuming that it's exploitative secret, not like, you know,
Mutually
the secret.
agreeable. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, because look, in some cases, again, secret means it's used very loosely. This has been one of my issues with the term secret marriage. It's used very loosely. So, like I said, you do have situations where the woman wants to keep it secret for her own benefit, right? Or the wali will, her father will know, for example, and then they just don't want to tell the larger community. So, not talking about that, right? Let's talk about exploitatively secret, as we've talked about before. Um, so even then, a lot of times when it's brought up, there's two things, right? One is helping someone cover up in a malicious way, which happens, which really does happen. Or there's just the other side, which is not seeing it as a big deal, right? Because there's a lot about like, women are fitna, these things happen. Look, it wasn't zina. They tried to do it, it didn't work. It's not the end of the world. This stuff happens. Don't do it again, that kind of stuff. Or because again, all these elements of manipulation, it's also hard to see from sometimes. So it'll just be dismissed as like a private matter. Let's not get, we don't really know what happened. Marriages are messy. So just ignoring it. That happens a lot of times as well. And sometimes, even when the woman is demanding her rights, which again, even if she's like we talked about, like not wearing the hijab anymore, she still deserves her mahar. There's nothing that says if a woman doesn't wear her hijab, she forfeits her mahar. So these are just bad things kind of said to justify not dealing with what people need to deal with. And what will end up happening sometimes is, again, this can happen maliciously, this can happen with good intentions. And it happens with both, right? One is the bigger figure, the bigger sheikh, assuming it's the setup where it's like some middle tier sheikh and there's someone above them coming. They'll just talk to the lady, look, this is part of your tests on your path to Allah. Forgive him and you'll have something greater with Allah. So it can be, no, but it can be spiritualizing her problem to just placate it and move on. And that side wins, right? It can also be that if someone's role is that of a spiritual guide or a sheikh, that's the language they have. That's their role. Like they're not a qadi. This isn't tahkim. This isn't arbitration. So what else is he supposed to do other than console her? So it can be what the person's role is, or it could be manipulative. And you get both. And the problem a lot of times is when those in position, primarily a sheikh with his murid, is in position to discipline him, remove him from his position, even ordering him to do so, right? And they just don't do it. They just don't want to get involved, which can be malicious, or it could just be not wanting to get involved. And you have to know that when you're going into these kind of scenarios. So what the problem again is when women are in these groups, they're dealing with the same mentality, even if it's different figures that they're going to. So it's very difficult for her to really get her rights, especially the more respected and higher status the figure has.
Mm. But even the silence, it just enables the situation to happen again and again, right?
No, absolutely. I was just trying to explain that sometimes it's malicious.
Mm.
I've seen it. I mean, look, I've seen behind closed doors, right? When these cases are talked about, how they'll just talk about women being, what's the word? Groupies, right? And this is just what happens. What do you expect? She knew what she was getting into. Women aren't all that innocent as well, which even if you are to believe all of that, it never justifies her not getting her rights, because rights, like the meher especially, it has nothing to do with the kind of person she is, right? So that happens, but also it's just ineptitude. There's a lot of ineptitude as well.
Mm. Thanks.
and limited power, of course.
Danish, can you tell us more about the secret marriages that are not exploitative?
Right. So there may be reasons, and this is where we really have to understand that people will come to marriage with different expectations and different desires and different just cultural understanding of marriage, right? So some people want a secret marriage, meaning that they just don't want people to really know about it, right? They don't want the community at large to know. They want to have their private married life. And it could be to avoid stigma, right? If a divorcee is getting married right after her iddah, for example, if a widow is getting married right after, her iddah as well, or even soon after. I mean, it depends because some cultures will say never get married again, right? So those kind of situations, a lot of times the woman does want to keep it secret, and everyone agrees. And her wali knows. Everybody that really needs to know will know. And in other cases, it'll be because it's a polygamous marriage. So people will give a polygamous, I can't say couple, I guess, but like a polygamous entity like a hard time, and at that situation, you could see it's like their job to protect their marriage before it is to do, to go tell everybody. So this argument, well, the ideal of a marriage is to tell everybody. Okay, well, clearly to protect their family, it makes sense to forego that, right? Because it's given precedence. So a lot of times people who are in, a man with two wives, and let's say everybody knows, like both wives know of one another, even their friends, they have no problem. Other people have a problem. And then these people, if they're sheikhs, will get blackballed. I've seen, religious teachers get blackballed because they have two wives. Nothing shady at any level happened, but they blackballed them. And you know why? Sometimes it's the wives of their other sheikh friends that they do stuff with, just don't want this man to speak at all anymore because they get worried, like, what if, they just don't like the fact that this happened, or they're worried about what if my husband gets
Mm.
influenced.
Because
And
then
then,
they feel threatened, right? Because they worry if their own spouse would do the same thing.
mhm. Yeah, that's one of the reasons. And then these men just don't want problems at home. So they'll just cut off their friend who took a second wife in no shady way whatsoever. And that is completely wrong. So there are reasons why people will keep it secret from the larger community. And to say, well, not from a religious figure, we should expect more. Like, no, why? He's not doing anything wrong. And if you're going to stigmatize someone taking a second marriage, and it does happen, we know it very well, they are blackballed, then why does it matter to anybody else? Like they don't have to go around telling everybody.
And
And look, just wait a few years until polygamy is normalized, and these people are going to be considered martyrs for the cause. These poor victims who had to hide their love in a society that didn't understand polygamy.
yeah, it's all relative, right? Danish, your field lies specifically in the Muslim community. Could you elaborate? How does this all begin? What is the start? When I say all this, I mean the secret marriage, the temporary marriage, whatever you want to call them.
So how's it made so easy? I mean, it's not difficult to see how a lot of religious leaders are marketed, right? And you look at the neo-trad circles, the more tasawwuf oriented groups, they're seen as your guides to God, right? The people that you have to be connected to, and the people who will filter your religion to you. Now, whenever one of them has a scandal, as has happened many times now, that are public, what the messaging of these orgs will be: this is why we don't put anyone on a pedestal, no one is infallible, and only follow the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. However, the next day they will be marketing their next sheikh as the same ideal person that has caused many other problems, right? Because it's part of their whole system. So they're the ones who will tell you don't idealize anyone while telling you to idealize these people and go sit at their feet. And um, these are your connections to God. And that's what they really need to stop. But it's damaging to their business model. It's really easy when everyone is told to idealize these people. They have immense power over anybody. Look, I mean, you take marriages out of it, right? It's like they're people in these neo-trad circles are taught to say these people, they can see your sins. They know if you did something wrong. They'll have a lot of stories to back this. All they have to do, and this happens a lot, is look at someone like that, and the students themselves, the people in attendance will think, oh, he saw my sins, he saw my sins. They have a lot of power over people. And this stuff is mentioned, it is marketed. People, there are rumors of people having different types of karamat and different status just based on who they're connected to, even overseas. So rather than judging by actions, they're even trained to say, but this great wali, some sheikh overseas, said this about him, so he must be a wali as well, he must be great. So rather than looking at actions and judging the way they're supposed to judge people, they judge based on what other people say, even if they see the actions contradicting what it means to be an upright Muslim. So it's incredibly easy in these circles, especially. And if you go outside, it's just a basic, simple thing of hooking up, really. I mean, you can look at pickup artists, right? They've broken it down to a science. So you see similar pickup artist strategies in people when they want these kind of shoddy marriages. So it's not a very difficult thing.
Are you able to share some anonymized stories that illustrate the complexity of the consequences of a secret marriage?
The consequences, well, one common consequence, especially in these, more tasawwuf-oriented circles, will be they take the idea that if you show enmity to a wali, then God declares war on them, right? Then Hadith Qudsi. So a lady will have this bad marriage, will be divorced, discarded, really, treated horribly. She wants her rights, even just at the basic level of rights. We agreed to a mahar, I'm not getting this mahar. Appeals to everybody. And in her world, this tariqa or these few sheikhs who are a lot of times partners in crime, that's her whole religious, those are all her religious resources. That's like the deen to her in terms of scholarship. So she's appealed to all of them. She's not getting what she wants. Now she gets obviously very sad, depressed. And what is that now? That is God. That is interpreted and spun as God's war on her. It's highly manipulative, right? But it's actually just the normal process of being ostracized, of not being given your rights, of being made to feel like you're just not worthy of things that your God give, literally your God-given rights. And then they're discarded, and then the group moves on, and she's now a cautionary tale of people who didn't conform. So this is the real damage. And then if she takes her hijab off, right? So she'll have this issue. She'll maybe not wear hijab anymore, which happens, or even post pictures online, not dressed, very modest. See, her reality came out. Allah exposes people. Be careful. Allah exposes people. This is her haqiqah. This is who she was. And it's just her state being revealed.
So they demonize her. They demonize her even though he acted unjustly, but now they have all the ammunition to paint her in the poorest light.
Yeah. And it all justifies the bad stuff that happened to her as if she just deserved it.
Wow. Danish, what advice would you give to women who are tempted to enter into such a marriage?
Well, look, anybody if is who's trying to push into this kind of marriage, saying you can't do better, saying be realistic, this person's not going to be a good husband. He's already like breaking you down. So I would definitely advise not to do that. Anyone pushing you away from your wali, from your father, this is not the kind of person you should be getting married to.
And what are red flags that somebody is entering into a secret marriage for the wrong reasons?
Mm. So red flags that it's a bad marriage again is that someone's using dreams, telling you this is spiritually good for you to marry me, or saying you can't do better or be realistic about your situation. Those kind of things are signs it's a bad marriage. And of course, telling you to keep it secret at any level. I'm not talking about the Maliki, view of secret. I mean, at any level, telling you to keep it secret or guiding you away from your wali. So those are red flags of a bad marriage.
So we're going to now move over to another topic entirely, and that's pedophilia. This is an important
Mm.
topic because many of the people watching this, they have children. Okay. So how does this manifest in our community?
The same way it manifests in every other community. If it's a predator, he's going to gain trust that's either in your personal life or through an or through an institution, meaning being put in a position of trust to access kids. Some people do that. Others, it's just through opportunity. So even if they didn't intentionally seek it, they have the opportunity. So what's really important is at the institutional level to have checks and balances in place, as many protocols as possible to limit opportunity, and likewise in family structures or family friend structures to limit opportunities as well. And kids should be taught about appropriate touch and inappropriate touch, who can take the child to the bathroom, cannot, for example. That's a way of teaching things without being too explicit.
How rampant is pedophilia in our Muslim communities?
Yeah, I don't know what the statistics are on Muslims specifically, but I would imagine it's in line with the larger culture of depending where people are.
Are you able to share incidents that have actually occurred?
Just what aligns with what we see in the larger culture, again, whether it's in schools, so like a Sunday school or Quran school would not be too different than a Christian school or a public school, even where pedophilia is not really talked about enough, how much it happens in public schools, camping trips. Really, it's whatever allows access to people, and what even reactions, of forgiving the perpetrator, people defending him if he's a teacher. This happens all across the board. This even happens with coaches and public school teachers who've won Teacher of the Year. They will be defended by other parents and community members as people who are being targeted because they're successful teachers. So sometimes we think it's only the sheikh who's defended or the imam who's defended, but even a Teacher of the Year or someone who's doing good community work as a volunteer sports coach will be defended in the same way.
So, what should we as parents be cautious of specifically?
Someone who is making your child uncomfortable, also someone who wants access to your child. And this is similar to the marriage thing I mentioned, where sometimes single mothers will be put down if they have a boy, right? Like, oh, your son needs a man to take him around. He needs an older brother figure, an uncle figure. And that's where he steps in and has outings with the child, right? So that's also demeaning to the mother to have access to the child. And any kind of discomfort your child is showing around certain adults, that needs to be paid attention to. And also, like I said, there really needs to be a way of talking to your kids about this threat without necessarily being explicit about it.
And how do we hold perpetrators accountable, especially if they are noteworthy figures in the community?
So this one is easier than secret marriages because it's illegal, right? Go to the police. This should be reported right away. And Islamic schools, I mean, everyone there needs to be trained on mandatory reporting as well. Every institute should identify who the mandatory reporters are, what that entails, and all of this needs to happen before, for example, before the school year starts. Don't wait for a crisis to happen. And institutions need to have clear policies of, for example, a teacher can't go with a student to this room, or even close the door with just a teacher and a student. So you don't have to meet the high level of evidence for pedophilia, right? Or something egregious happening. You could just say, look, we're terminating your contract because of what you did. You knew, you were trained not to do so. It's not like you didn't know. It wasn't just an innocent thing. You were told not to do this, yet you did it. So we're going to have to let you go, because we can't take risks when it comes to children.
Mm. I've heard of stories of the person being elderly and then they don't report him because they just say, oh, well, we'll dismiss him, but just let him lead his life, and
Yeah.
it's
I mean, look
appalling,
at how Jerry Sandusky was covered for Larry Nasser. Larry Nasser even had police interviews and he was let go. So people are covered for, especially the more powerful they are, they're covered up across society. It's not at all specific to religion. Because sometimes I think honestly we mention the Catholic Church too much. Look at public education and sports. It happens so often there. And one thing, it was actually a cardinal who told me this. He said that the West's cultural baggage is with Christianity more than anything else, more than any other religion, as a symbol of rules and laws. So they really target Christianity. But if you look at sports and public education, I mean, it's just as rampant there.
Let's move on to the topic of ruqya. Could you explain to our audience what is ruqya and what is a raqi?
So yeah, ruqya is you could call it a spiritual healing, meaning like done with Quran. Um, a raqi is somebody who does this, right? So maybe reading Quran on somebody who's been afflicted with ayn, like evil eye, or jinn, demon possession, jinn possession, and he is working to heal that person
Right.
from
So,
black magic or jinn or evil eye.
right. So usually the people who contact raqis, there's some need involved. They need to be healed or, exercise in some way. So these would might be vulnerable people. Can you tell us some incidents where, so just let's put the disclaimer that ruqya is something that's part of the sunnah. And there are many, many raqis out there who are entirely legit and sincere. But of course, you're going to get your bad apples and everything. So, in terms of the exploitative nature that of some of the raqis, could you expand upon that, please?
Yeah. No, I mean, look, it's like anything else. We talked about spiritual abuse with religious leaders. Yeah, there's a lot of good sheikhs and there's a lot of good Quran teachers. These things happen in every field. So ruqya as well. So people will come. So talking about the abuse. So people will come to a raqi a lot of times with problems and they're in a state of despair, right? So, for example, a woman who's had multiple engagements broken, or a couple that cannot have children, a woman who can't have children, right? So, or there's an illness that they can't explain, meaning they've gone to doctors and the doctors can't figure it out. So they come to the raqi, and they're oftentimes willing to do what they normally would not do. So abuse stories of this would include asking the woman to undress, which is completely haram, and touching. So it could be groping or anything else, including giving drinks, right? And then she doesn't remember what happened afterwards, or waking up and the clothes she knows they've been removed, or just outright saying that intercourse will heal you. You know,
That
um,
actually has happened.
yeah, I wrote a whole article on it. Yeah. So, and the thing to keep in mind is like, again, these are people who might be very skeptical. They might not be inclined to any kind of religious spirituality. They might be actually what we in common speech might call a secular Muslim, right? But they very much believe in these kind of things because a lot of these, so-called secular Muslims, they'll have like one Amil type figure, and Amil also being like a Raqi spiritual healer in their family, right? Like if they're wealthy, for example, their parents, they themselves may have one kind of spiritual healer in their family that they go to for everything. So even those people that we see as secular will have some connection to these type of people. It's a lot more common than people realize to have this type of connection, and they'll hide it to others, maybe even say, I don't believe in these things, but they do. So they will do things they don't normally do because their situation feels very desperate and they're taken advantage of and exploited. So what needs to be really understood is touch between a man and a woman, just like it's not allowed in any other in normal circumstances, is not allowed in ruqya. A false raqi will say that a doctor is allowed to touch you for healing. You're allowed to show the area where you're harmed for healing. This is a spiritual healing. Therefore, I can touch you. Therefore, I can see your aura. But this is a false analogy. Spiritual healing, ruqya, does not require any of that, and it's haram. So that is absolutely critical to understand.
And so, Danish, what should women be cautious of when they go to a raqi?
Women specifically should know that there should be no touching and no undressing. However, both men and women, um, because this actually happens to men as well, sexual like assaulting and groping happens to men as well. Both men and women should go with somebody else, and don't drink anything. You know, don't drink anything, but go with somebody.
Yeah, I think that's the best thing. Always have some kind of chaperone. And this happens internationally, right?
I
It's
mean,
not
sorry, if you
just,
bring your own water, for example, if you bring your own water and the Rocky recites over it, that's different. But I'm talking about he gives you some like potion, you know, don't
right.
drink that.
And Danish, this happens internationally, right? It's not limited to, for
Yeah, yeah.
example, the US.
No, 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 no. It happens all over. All of these things we talked about happen everywhere. We're
Hmm.
not as unique in any way as we like to think.
So when we hear about a scandal, a situation that comes out, how do you advise we respond?
I advise that if you're not involved, then you're just not going to know what really happened, you know. And من حسن إسلام المرء تركه ما لا يعنيه. From a person's perfection of their religion is leaving what doesn't concern them. So to take a stance on something you have no idea about is just not something that you should do. And if you are directly involved, that's a different story. But most of the time, it's just theater, and we don't have the facts, especially if it's related to marriage. So I think also, when people hear that this person did this or this person did that, they should ask for some evidence, or how do you know that this person did that? Because it's one thing to talk about from the perspective of warning somebody that these are the signs, like we talked about, right? Manipulative tactics. But it's another to say that this is what this person did. So as a preventative, it's great, but not really as for judging what somebody did. Because look, a lot of things that people will do, just even if they're in love, for example, just like ishq, right? They will, their pursuit of a person will resemble manipulation sometimes, but it's not, you know even like, oh, we don't need to tell anyone, let's just get married. It's like, okay, you could read that as a guiding away from, like, guiding to secret nikah, or it's a romantic way of eloping. And you sometimes people post these things of like how it started, or maybe how it ended, or something like how it started, meaning like their marriage talks, and then the fact that they now got married, right? It's like a Gen Z thing. So if you look at a lot of these how it started, it can be changed as like creepy and stalking and all of these sort of things. And what's charming from one person is creepy and a boundary violation from another person. So even text messages, right? You could take text messages between friends, and just like, it's like any other text meaning like book or scripture that's decontextualized. And you say, look what this person's doing to me. And you'll have all these therapists saying, oh, he's totally gaslighting you. This is a borderline. This is a narcissist. It's just like a few messages. It's not the full picture. So I think that if you're not directly involved, just stay out of it and don't have an opinion on something you don't know about.
Thank
But
you.
if someone admits something, that's a different story. And just to kind of bring it back, to be honest with you, in these neo-trad, more to self-oriented circles, the issue is the sheikh can admit to doing wrong and then say, well, he's not, well, I'm not masoom, or others will say, well, he's not masoom. What do you want? You want a prophet? No, he's a wali. Al-wali qad yazni, that a wali could fornicate. He's still a wali. And then the faults are admitted. So it's not speculative, right? This is what I really try to convey. It's not speculation. There's an outright admission of doing these shady things. There's an admission of not giving her mahar, but she doesn't wear hijab, so she doesn't deserve it, right? And it's accepted. It's the cult mentality where everything's admitted, acknowledged, and it's still defended. That's very different than an accusation and something that's not confirmed. So we shouldn't mix the two.
Thank you. That was a thorough explanation. Thank you. Danish, thank you so much for covering all of these salient points related to secret marriages, pedophilia, and ruqya. I think that we've all learned a lot here, and hopefully that our community will be cautious and take heed from what you've said. Thank you so much. Is anything else you would like to add in closing?
Well, when it comes to secret marriages, for example, I think that we should expect and push for institutions to have clear guidelines over what they allow, what meets their expectations or not. So then the arguments don't regress to what's haram by ijma. Because what happens far too often is, bad behavior is justified as, well, it's not haram, well, the contract is valid, and you can circumvent all of that just by um, making clear expectations beforehand. And this prevents any kind of public judging as well, meaning trial by public opinion. Because what we want is institutions to just handle things themselves as a violation of professional expectations. And this way, you don't have to get into like public exposures and public scandals and what happened here, what happened there, you know? So that would be regarding secret marriages, that's really important. And if someone's in a Sufi tariqa or in one of these, conscious communities or living in a place that centers around a sheikh, they should really ask, like, what are the accountability mechanisms here? Is it just as long as he has permission from his sheikh and that anything goes? Are there really any accountability measures here? Because people get ostracized from these groups all the time. And then the narrative that's pushed out is, oh, this is such a great place. These shuyukh are so wonderful. Because all these people who get pushed out, who are demonized and wronged and then demonized and oppressed, they have no recourse and they're not part of the narrative that comes out. So ask, what are the mechanisms in place to hold the shuyukh to any type of standard? And then for pedophilia, again, all institutions should have training and there should be cameras in the places there need to be and clear protocol of working with children. And as far as ruqya, again, what I mentioned, I can't say this enough. There's no touching between men and women in ruqya. Ruqya is not an excuse to touch or to see aura. Can't say that enough.
Thank you so much, Danish. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum assalam.